Hey there guys, Assetto Fanboy here, and in this video we're going to be reviewing the 1994 Formula 1 Grand Prix season mod done by ACFL. Now, my initial impressions are, it's a paid mod, so expectations really should be high because a lot of people just expect mods to be free. I personally don't expect mods to be free, however if I'm paying for them I expect them to be top premium quality. So I don't mind paying, you know, a few quid, couple quid for a mod because people pay for DLC. So I think the whole not paying for mods thing is a bit of a stupid point, but anyway, let's get into this mod. As you can see from these replay cameras, my personal impressions, the models themselves seem presentable for Assetto Corsa. I mean, I think the cars look great, to be honest, especially with the sparks as well coming from the back of the cars. I think that gives it that extra bit of detail some Grand Prix mods do miss. But yeah, also depends on what track you take around as well. Certain tracks have different lighting qualities as well, such as the Imola 88 or Imola 94. You'll have a different feel of the mod compared to the Kudos Imola. But yeah, I think this mod overall is pretty solid. I'll get into the reviews of each of the cars and then we'll do a shootout at the end for the fastest 1994 car around the Kudos Imola circuit. And yeah, I think overall the mod's decent. I wouldn't recommend it if you don't normally like to pay for mods. However, me myself, I love the 94 cars. I think they're brilliant. Of course, Ayrton Senna's last season in Formula 1 before his tragic death. So for me personally to pay, I think at the time it was a couple euros for the beta mod of this, and obviously now I get the whole mod for free and all the updates for free. So for me personally at the time it was worth it, but if you don't like to pay for mods then I wouldn't recommend it if you were considering getting this. But anyway, without further ado, I'll let you listen to some of the replay sounds and then we'll get into the reviews of each of the cars. Enjoy. What a glorious car this is. Welcome to the Ferrari 412 T1. This was the 1994 Ferrari 3.5 litre V12 naturally aspirated, and as you can hear it is bloody gorgeous. Absolutely love the sound of this thing. Running with the Goodyear tyres of course for that season, driven by 27 Jean Alesi and number 28 Gerhard Berger. Debuted obviously at the Brazilian Grand Prix in 1994. Picked up one win from 16 races, so wasn't particularly a Grand Prix winner. However, it did pick up 11 podiums throughout that whole season, so it was a fairly consistent car. It was a pretty good car for podium finishes, it has to say, but wasn't quite up there with the likes of Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill for race wins. However, it did get 3 pole positions, so inherent pace in the car on Saturday was there throughout the 1994 season. However, some actually argued that Gerhard Berger and Jean Alesi were the reason why the car never won as many races as it did, because famously Michael Schumacher, when he tested the 95 car, said that it was actually a really good car. So maybe Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger probably aren't as good a drivers as people made out they were, maybe, who knows. But yeah, pretty solid car throughout the whole season, bound with a bunch of reliability issues. Jean Lacey actually retired from 5 Grand Prix in a row, including the Italian Grand Prix, which he picked up pole position for Ferrari. And the car designed by famous John Barnard, the brilliant designer at Ferrari, who previously designed the 641 and 642 Ferraris in the 1990 and 1991 season. They were beautiful cars in their own right, but however, beauty doesn't win anything. This car was far from beautiful. It had really funky side pods compared to the rest of the grid, but yeah, it was a fairly consistent car in the way that it scored podiums, however, it wasn't quite up there with the race winner. So what do I make of this car in Assetto Corsa? Well, it's a handful around Mugello in cold conditions. However, when I was doing the hot lapping with this car around Imola, it was the most beautifully balanced car of all the cars on the grid. Maybe isn't the quickest car out there, but it's definitely the most balanced. I can see why it scored so many podiums that season, because it is just such a consistent, such a smooth, such a nice driving experience, and you'd expect that from Ferrari really. So yeah, for me, this car gets a thumbs up in this review. Let's go into some of the less drivable cars. This is the 1994 Ligier Renault JZ39B. This was the B-spec car of the 1993 Ligier they ran in the 93 season. Just following on to the 94 season, carried on with this car. Not really a serious threat, even in the midfield particularly, but the one thing this car had was reliability, enabling both drivers to finish on the podium in the hectic German Grand Prix here at Hockenheim, with Olivier Panis finishing second and Eric Bernard finishing third, which was an absolutely crazy result for the team considering this was just a 1993 car done to the 1994 season specifications. But yeah, for me, this car was absolutely horrible to drive. It was all over the place, it wasn't balanced, as you can see spinning off there, didn't like any sort of curbs. For me, absolute horrible car. The one thing I will say is it had a very nice engine tone, as it had the Renault engine, the same in the Williams Renault. But yeah, other than that, the team actually only scored 2 other points finishes for that whole season, which was a more accurate representation of where this car was on the grid. But yeah, nevertheless, it's cool to have the whole grid on in this mod, but for me personally, this car was absolutely horrible to drive, and I will not be returning to it anytime soon. But yeah. Time to get back on track, I think, to a car that I can get behind in this mod, and that is the Mclaren. Now, this car was really, really nice to drive. A weird year for Mclaren, as they'd recently ditched the Ford power that had powered Benetton this season to the World Championship, so a bit of a faux power on McLaren's part maybe, who knows, but they were powered by Peugeot engines. Yes, that's right, McLaren, who famously won many championships with Honda, won Grand Prix with Ford, lost Ayrton Senna to Williams for this season, and yes, they went to the French outfit for a engine. Now, I'm not really sure what the history behind that was. I believe maybe they had a falling out with Ford at some point, maybe. I'm not really too sure. However, Peugeot was who they went for. Of course, they did test Lamborghini engines as well in 1993, so bit surprised that they went with Peugeot. But yeah, the Peugeot engine, a 3.5 litre V10 this season, actually was good enough for McLaren to get 8 podiums in the 1994 season. However, they did go without a race win, which was the first time for many years for McLaren. But yeah, producing around 700 brake horsepower. The engine proved unreliable for both Mika Hakkinen and Martin Brundle that season, who retired for the first 2 races, suffering an engine failure each. Peugeot would then later introduce a 760 brake horsepower V10 engine for McLaren, which, while gave Mika Hakkinen a 3rd place at San Marino and Martin Brundle 2nd at Monaco, was often considered a hand grenade due to frequent failures in testing, qualifying and the races. And it wasn't until the Italian Grand Prix at Monza where their reliability really started to come into it. And by the end of the 1994 season, McLaren had given up with Peugeot and decided to sign on with Mercedes-Benz for a long-term contract, which, as we all know, we know how that went, led to win many championships with Mercedes-Benz. So yeah, the 1994 season will always be a bit of a weird one for McLaren, as they'd lost Ayrton Senna, they'd had Peugeot engines, no race win since 1980, but yeah, a season that they will want to forget along with their recent seasons to come. But anyway, let's get back to this mod. Really nice to drive actually, it's balanced, it's sophisticated, of course the modelling and the suspension and all that are great. Yeah, anyway, this car, for a Peugeot engine, probably one of the best sounding Peugeots I've ever heard, to be honest. But yeah, the McLaren, a really beautifully designed car, to be honest. I mean, it did get 8 podiums, so it was a consistent car throughout the season. I'm not saying it's the quickest car in this mod, because obviously it wasn't in the 94 season, so it shouldn't be in this mod, but it is a really nice car to drive. It's one of those cars that you can just get in and do laps in, and you feel confident in the car, which I guess is the most important thing when you're getting a mod or paying for a mod, is you want a car that you can just jump into and just drive around the track and learn how to drive it and get the most out of it. There are certain mods that you just get into and you just want to learn how to drive the damn thing, and you're just constantly spinning, and yeah, it can be infuriating, especially when you pay for a mod and it drives a bit crap, to be honest. Whereas this car, it's nice to drive, you can get confident with it. So yeah, really nice car in the 94 mod. So far I would recommend this and the Ferrari to drive. But anyway, let's check out some of the other cars in this mod pack and see what they are all about. Next up we have the Benetton B19, the most surprising car in this mod pack, as for me it wasn't a car I got behind at all really. It didn't drive how I expected it to, especially with the alleged traction control system. And I'm not saying I expected it to have traction control, but I expected it to be quite a drivable car. But actually it's not undrivable, but it's harder work than some of the other cars, especially cars like the Ferrari and the Mclaren to drive, which I guess for talented drivers like Michael Schumacher, it really showed how good a driver he was and just showed the immense talent he had. However, for his teammates, they always seem to struggle in the Benetton years compared to him. For instance, Jos Verstappen, Johnny Herbert in the 95 season. Just the car just seemed to be very difficult in those seasons for the second driver next to Michael Schumacher to actually get behind. And that was the case with me really. I didn't really ever feel connected with the car, to say, but I could see why it was a quick car. I could see how Michael Schumacher managed to get it to a world championship. But for me, quite a difficult car to get pace out of initially, but once you do get pace out of it, it's reasonable to drive. But boy, was this a controversial car in the 1994 season, as was Benetton as a team in general. The car alleged to have traction control by the likes of Ayrton Senna and other F1 experts in the paddock, and Benetton were also alleged to, I think they were actually caught using an illegal fuel rig system which allowed them to pump more fuel into the car than was allowed, or more fuel in a quicker time, or something along the lines of that. But yeah, the car picked up 8 wins that season, with Michael Schumacher taking all 8 of them. Took 12 podiums throughout the season, 6 pole positions, again all by Michael Schumacher. And as I said earlier, his teammates never really got on with the car. Jos Verstappen, JJ Leto and Johnny Herbert, all struggling throughout their time alongside Michael Schumacher at Benetton. Whether that was because they put more emphasis behind him, or it just showed what an elite driver Michael Schumacher was compared to those guys, I'm not really too sure. But yeah, took him to a controversial world championship at the end at the Adelaide Grand Prix, taking out Damon Hill right at the end this was all in a period before I was watching Formula 1, so I'm sure at the time it would have made me have an effect on how I looked at Michael Schumacher. But for me personally, it's never stopped me from thinking he is the greatest F1 driver of all time. He did some questionable things. Every top driver has done some questionable things, so without any doubt, Michael Schumacher the best F1 driver currently. Lewis Hamilton could get close to taking that from him, but anyway, this car, quite an understeering car as well, I have to say, all with the default setup, all these mod cars, just so you all know. And yeah, just a very difficult car to get turned in. The back end seemed secure, but the front end just didn't want to talk to me, really. I turned the car and it was just a lot of effort to get it turned in. It felt heavy as well, the car did. So anyway, I'm sure with some setup work this car will be the quickest, but for me, not really the nicest car I've ever driven. But yeah, let's get into some of the other cars in this mod pack. And then finally, for the top tier of cars, we have the Williams FW16 now. This car at the start of the season was a very difficult car to drive. Ayrton Senna, even though he managed to take pole position for the first 3 races, he failed to finish any of those first 3 races, with Damon Hill not getting particularly hooked up with the car either. So the Williams at the start of the season, of course, they'd lost all their active suspension trickery that they had the previous seasons, and traction control and all that had been outlawed as well, so Williams kind of had to go back to basic. Being an advanced engineering team, for them it was almost hard to comprehend how to go back to basics, if you know what I mean. So the car at the start of the season was a very difficult car for the Williams team to actually set up. But yeah, this car taking 7 victories throughout the 1994 season, with Damon Hill taking 6 of those, and a returning Nigel Mansell for the final victory in the Australian Grand Prix at Adelaide. The team managed to win the Constructors' Championship despite the loss of Ayrton Senna. Damon Hill and David Coulthard throughout the majority of the season managed to do a really solid job at recovering from that poor start of the season and actually overhauling Benetton, who granted had a less superior second driver compared to David Coulthard and Nigel Mansell for the last 3 races. However, the car did get a lot better throughout the season, resorting to the FW16B, which had a longer wheelbase, resorting to revised front and rear wings as well as revised side pods. So the car was drastically changed by the German Grand Prix after that unfortunate incident with Ayrton Senna at Imola. But yeah, the car, in the mod anyway, is a nice car to drive. It is a bit unstable at the rear, however the front end does feel connected, unlike the Benetton. And I've got to say, the sound of that 3.5 litre V10 from Renault, absolutely glorious in this mod. I'll say the cockpit sound is a bit too high pitch and a bit too screamy, as you hear from the onboards in the 94 season. It's got a more lower pitch bellow to it, but the outboard sounds absolutely wonderful. I love it. So there we go, those are my personal preferences for this mod. The Ferrari gets a big yes for me. It just seems very poised and balanced, very Italian. The Jordan car as well, I have to say, which I actually didn't cover in this video, was actually quite a nice car to drive as well. The Mclaren for me also gets a nod of approval in this mod. It's beautifully sounding, and again is just a well balanced car all round. Some less favourable cars such as the Sauber here. A lot of the midfield to back end cars in this mod do feel a bit disconnected. The Benetton also was a bit of a disappointment. The front end just felt lazy and it just felt like a big cumbersome car, but yeah, the footwork, my god, was that handful around the Okayama circuit at Food. But yeah, my personal preferences are definitely the top end of the cars and maybe the Jordan as well. I find the worse the car is in real life, the worse it is to drive in the car. I mean, the LaRousse as well even at a basic circuit like Monza, it just felt so disconnected. And same with the Lotus here at Montreal. That, as you can see there, back in just stepped out, and that was just under braking. I adjusted every setting I could, and just, yeah, was not a nice car to drive at all. So if you want to spend €4.50 on the mod, then you're really going to only be driving 5 cars out of it, which might seem worth it, might not. For me personally, I only paid €2 for it because at the time it was a beta, so for me it's worth it. But yeah, we'll get into the hot lap comparisons now and see which one of these cars are the quickest.